Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're probably going to make you a little uncomfortable.
I think that's a fair warning.
And I say that with the best possible intentions, but we are staring down one of the absolute oldest, most haunting questions of the human experience today.
It's the big one.
It really is. It's the question that keeps people up at night and frankly defines the rise and fall of entire civilizations. We're asking, why do things happen the way they do?
Right.
Why does one person rise to absolute power, right, while another person who seems, I don't know, just as capable, struggles in complete obscurity? Why do some nations just prosper out of nowhere while others crumble into dust?
It is the ultimate inquiry into cause and effect. It's the machinery of history, really.
Exactly. And usually when we try to answer this, we fall into two camps. Camp A says it's all just luck.
Blind, chaotic chance.
The whole right place, right time thing. But then Camp B says it's destiny, it's fate, it's divine will. It was just meant to be.
In that second answer, the divine will answer, it often feels a bit like a conversation ender, doesn't it?
It really does. It feels like a very polite way to say, stop asking questions.
Because it's a very comfortable place to be, psychologically speaking.
How so?
Well, it absolves us of responsibility. If it's all just written in the stars, then my failure isn't actually my fault.
Oh, I see.
And my oppressor's power isn't something I can challenge because, hey, the universe wanted him there. It creates this state of total passivity.
Which perfectly brings us to the stack of sources we have for today, because we are looking at a really deep, almost radical exegesis of the Quran today.
Very radical.
Specifically, we're looking at Surah al-Baqarah verses 246 and 247, and we're drawing heavily on the lectures and the really dense analysis of the scholar Allama Ghulam Ahmad Parvez.
Yes, his work is foundational here.
And the whole mission of this deep dive today is to unpack a worldview from these sources that completely rejects that passive fatalism you just mentioned.
It really is a radical shift from the traditional understanding that a lot of people have. The sources we're analyzing today, they argue that divine will isn't a random lottery system. It's not a whim. It is a strict, unchangeable system of law.
So it's physics.
Exactly. It's physics, but applied to sociology and power.
So we are essentially moving from waiting for fate to actually understanding the law.
Precisely. And to do that, we're going to explore three massive ideas today. First, there's this brutal takedown of the aristocracy.
Which I loved.
It's so good. We'll get into why the sources argue that leadership has absolutely nothing to do with your bank account or your last name.
Right.
Second is the physics of will. We're going to totally redefine how we understand God's intervention in the world.
And
third, which is the one I'm honestly still processing myself, is the ontology of oppression.
That one broke my brain a little bit during the prep.
It changes everything. We're going to find out why a soldier running away from a battle is technically, linguistically defined as an oppressor.
That it just changes everything about how we view duty. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's actually start with the story that anchors all of this.
Good idea. The historical narrative.
Right. So we are looking at a specific historical narrative involving the Bani Israel, the Israelites. Set the scene for us. What is the actual geopolitical situation happening in the text?
So the context provided by the sources is one of absolute desperation. This is not a story about a thriving empire at its absolute peak. The Bani Israel have been displaced. They've been kicked out of their homes. They are separated from their families.
They're refugees.
Essentially, yes. They are suffering under the thumb of a distinct oppressor who has effectively dismantled their entire society. And they reach a breaking point.
They're living through a period of profound national humiliation.
Exactly. And so in this desperation, they go to their prophet and they make a really specific demand.
They don't ask for food.
No. They don't ask for miracles either. They say, appoint for us a king or a commander so that we may fight in the way of Allah.
Pause right there because this jumped out at me. Appoint for us a king? Why a king? Why not a council or a democracy?
That is a great question. The sources suggest they were looking for a central authority to unify them.
Because they were fractured.
Right. They understood that to fight a centralized oppression, like a real military machine, you need a centralized command. They needed a focal point.
Because scattered tribes just cannot fight an organized empire.
Exactly. It's basic military strategy.
Yeah.
So the request itself, to fight back, to organize, to seek leadership, it seems really reasonable.
It sounds like they are finally waking up.
It is reasonable. But here's the catch. And this is where the text starts to peel back the layers of human psychology. The sources point out that when they used the word king or commander, they had a very specific image in their heads.
Right.
They're operating under what the text calls an ancient human psychological flaw.
Which is?
They assumed that a king, a leader, a commander, must be someone from the elite, someone with high status, someone with very deep pockets.
The aristocracy.
Precisely.
It's the great man theory, right? The idea that leaders are born in palaces, they aren't made in the trenches.
Exactly. They wanted a celebrity general. They wanted someone who looked the part, someone whose mere presence signaled wealth and power to the enemy.
But that's not what they get.
Not at all. Their prophet comes back with the divine appointment and announces, Allah has appointed Talut, who is known in the Bible as Saul, as your commander.
And let me guess, the crowd goes wild.
The exact opposite. The crowd goes immediately into protest mode. It is almost a riot of indignation.
Because he's not one of the elite.
Right. The sources highlight this backlash vividly. The elite say, how can he have authority over us when we are more deserving of leadership than him? He has not even been given an abundance of wealth.
I just love how explicit that objection is.
It's incredibly blunt.
Right. They don't say he's a bad strategist or he's not brave or he doesn't know the local terrain. They literally just say he's broke.
It is a pure, unadulterated, class-based objection. And this is where the sources invite us to really unpack the source of authority.
The elite among the Israelites essentially argued that leadership is a property right.
Wow. A property right.
Yes. They believed it belongs to the owners of society. If you have the gold, you make the rules. So they felt deeply insulted that a quote-unquote nobody was being placed over them.
Which, to be completely fair, is how 90% of human history has worked. We like to think we've moved past this today, but have we
Really? Not at all. We instinctively look at the guy in the most expensive suit or the person with the legacy last name, and we just assume competence.
We equate net worth with self-worth.
Exactly. But the divine rebuttal in the text is devastating to that worldview. The prophet answers them by saying, essentially, you are looking at the wrong metrics.
God didn't check his credit score.
No, he didn't choose him based on his bank account. He chose him based on two very specific things.
Ilm and jism. Let's really break those down because I feel like these two terms are doing a lot of heavy lifting in the sources.
They are the absolute pillars of the meritocratic mandate in this text. Let's start with ilm.
It translates roughly to knowledge or deep understanding. But in this context, the sources emphasize it is not just book smarts.
It's not about winning Jeopardy.
Right, it's not about memorizing trivia or having a fancy PhD on your wall. It represents actual intellectual capability, insight, what they call a sound mind.
So what does that look like for a commander?
A leader needs to be able to process complexity. They need to understand strategy to see the playing field clearly.
So it's cognitive processing power, situational awareness, the ability to see the chess moves 3 steps before they actually happen.
Correct. The ability to make the right decision when the pressure is incredibly high and the fog of war is thick. That is ilm.
That makes perfect sense.
Yep.
And then there is jism.
Yes, jism refers to the body, physical capability, vitality, presence.
Now, why does the body matter so much for a leader? Because we aren't talking about a boxing match here. We're talking about a general. Or even if we bring it to a modern context, a CEO or a president. Why is jism a requirement?
Well, first, we are talking about war in the literal text. But even in modern leadership, the sources argue that physical vitality is absolutely crucial.
Because of the stress.
Exactly. It is about stamina. It's about the nervous system's ability to handle crushing stress without collapsing.
Leadership is exhausting.
It takes a massive physical toll. The sources are very clear that a military commander cannot just be a brain in a jar. They need the physical capacity to endure the sheer hardships of the campaign, to stand tall and project calm when everyone else is dead tired.
It's that classical ideal, isn't it? A sound mind in a sound body.
It is exactly that. But think about what is missing from that list of requirements. Wealth is missing. Lineage is missing. Social connections, elite networks, all missing.
Wow.
The sources argue that the text here is establishing a strictly meritocratic standard. Authority is legitimized by what you have inside you, your mind and your physical resilience, not what you own or who your father was.
It completely decouples leadership from aristocracy.
It's a total paradigm shift.
That is massive. It effectively democratizes the potential for leadership. Because if you can build the ilm and you can build the jism, you are a candidate. You don't have to wait around to be born into the right family.
Exactly. It shifts the focus away from inherited status to cultivated capacity. It tells you, stop looking at what you were arbitrarily given and start looking at what you can actively build.
I love that.
But there's actually another layer to this appointment of Telet that I found fascinating in the exegesis. The text uses a very specific word, bastidan, to describe his qualities.
Bastan. That sounds like a linguistic deep dive.
It means abundance or extension.
So he just has an abundance of knowledge and an abundance of physique.
Yes, but the analysis goes deeper than just having it. It's not just that he possesses these traits in a vacuum. It is about what that abundance is for.
Explain that.
The word implies a spreading out, an expansion. The sources argue that bastidan implies an extension of these qualities outwards towards other people.
Oh, so it's about service.
Precisely. The leader doesn't accumulate knowledge and strength for personal gain. He doesn't use it just to help his immediate family or to enrich his political faction.
Right, he's not using his physical strength to bully people or his deep knowledge to manipulate the stock market.
Exactly. The abundance is strictly meant for the benefit of the nation and humanity as a whole. It is service over self.
So merit comes with an obligation.
Yes. If you have the merit, you have the duty to extend it to others. That is the true definition of legitimate leadership in this text. It's a functional definition. You lead because you can serve effectively, not because you were simply born to rule.
So to recap the setup here, we have the Israelites asking for a savior king, specifically wanting a rich celebrity one, and instead they get a meritocratic servant who is qualified solely by his mind and his body.
That is the setup.
But this story leads us into even stickier theological territory, because the text explicitly says God appointed him.
And here we go. This is the core of the deep dive. This is where we have to fundamentally deconstruct the idea of divine will.
Because usually when we read religious texts, or honestly even just hear people talk in daily life, we hear phrases like, if God wills, or God gives power to whom he wills.
Constantly.
Right. And I think for a lot of people, maybe most people, that translates to, it's random. God is up there just picking names out of a hat. You get to be king, you get to be a peasant, sorry. Better luck next life.
That is the absolute elephant in the room that the sources address head-on. They specifically call out this common translation, Masha or Manyasha, as whom he wills, as the root of
A cultural failure.
Yes. The sources argue that this specific translation has created a pervasive culture of
Fatalism, meaning I'm poor because God wants me to be poor, so I shouldn't even try to change it.
Exactly. It paints God as what the sources call an absolute dictator who acts on a pure whim.
Like a tyrant in the sky.
Right. The sources use this really striking example of a sick patient. If a person really believes in this arbitrary random version of will, they might refuse to see a doctor.
Because they think, if it is God's will that I am sick, who am I to fight it?
Exactly. They think, if I take medicine, am I challenging God's decree?
Which sounds totally absurd when you say it out loud, but people genuinely live their lives that way.
They do. And looking at the other side of the coin, it gets even darker. A wealthy tyrant might look at his wealth and say, I am rich and powerful because God willed it.
Wow.
Therefore, I am favored by the divine, and you peasants shouldn't question my authority.
That is the most dangerous application of that idea. It validates the status quo, no matter how terribly unjust it is. It makes oppression look like a divine endorsement.
It does. It turns God into an accomplice of the tyrant. God gave me the throne, so shut up.
It is the divine right of kings all over again.
It is exactly that. And this is where the lectures by Alama Parwez and the exegesis offer a completely radical reinterpretation. They introduce the concept of kanun imashiyat.
Konun imashet. Let's really unpack that, because that sounds like the key to all of this.
It translates to the law of divine will. The core argument here is that God's will isn't a whim. It is
A system.
It is a set of consistent universal laws. So when the text says God gives power to whom he wills, the sources interpret this as God gives power to those who meet the standard he willed.
Wait, that is a subtle but absolutely huge difference. Can you give me an analogy for that? Because I remember the sources had a really good one about a classroom.
Yes, the classroom analogy is perfect here. Imagine a university administration puts out a statement saying, we pass whom we will.
Okay.
Now, if you interpret that the way people usually interpret divine will, it sounds like the dean is just walking down the hall, randomly pointing at students saying, you fail.
Right. Which would be incredibly unfair and completely chaotic. No one would even bother studying because the result is totally random. Why work hard if the dean just flips a coin at the end of the semester?
Exactly. But we all know that's not what a university means. When they say we pass whom we will, what they implicitly mean is we have established a standard. We have a syllabus. We have exams.
Sure.
And it is our will, our policy, that whoever studies hard and meets the criteria will pass.
I see. So the will is the establishment of the criteria, not the arbitrary selection of the individual.
Precisely. It shifts the agency completely back to the individual. The selection isn't random. It's a direct result of engaging with the system. If you study, the system, the will dictates that you pass. If you don't study, the system dictates that you fail.
So applying this logic back to Talut and the concept of leadership, God didn't just randomly pick Talut out of a hat because he liked him best.
No, Talut met the standard.
He had the ilm and the jism.
He did the work. He developed the capacity. And because he met the criteria of the law of leadership, the natural result was that he was granted authority.
So under this interpretation, Masha, or divine will, is actually a guarantee of cause and effect. It is the machinery of the universe working exactly as it should.
Yes, it's the physics of will. And the sources argue that this applies to absolutely everything. Take another common phrase. God guides whom he wills.
Right, which sounds like he just chooses some people to be enlightened and leaves others in the dark.
But under Kanuni Mashiach, it doesn't mean he forces guidance into someone's brain while ignoring someone else. It means it is my law that whoever genuinely searches for the truth and strives for it, the result will be guidance.
And conversely, the phrase, God leads astray whom he wills,
Means it is my law that if you choose the path of error, arrogance, and ignorance, the result is that you will be lost. Exactly like gravity. If you step off a cliff, you fall. Not because God is angry at you personally in that specific moment, but because God willed the law of gravity.
You violated the parameters of safety, so the law simply took effect.
The outcome is a direct result of your input into the system.
That puts the ball so firmly back in the human court. It's kind of terrifying when you really think about it.
Why terrifying?
Because it completely kills the excuse. You can't say, oh, I'm just unlucky, or the universe is against me today. The sources seem to be saying the universe is a machine of laws. If you aren't getting the output you want, check your input. Check your merit.
It is a philosophy of total agency. The sources explicitly state that human success is not a lottery ticket from the heavens. It is the result of effort plus adhering to the law.
Wow.
And there is a really beautiful corollary to this mentioned in the text, specifically regarding the revocation of blessings.
Right, this is the part about why nations collapse.
The sources note a specific Quranic rule that states God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves.
Meaning you don't lose the blessing until you lose the merit that earned it in the first place.
Exactly. A nation doesn't collapse because God suddenly got angry on a random Tuesday. A nation collapses because it stopped following the laws of success, stopped valuing knowledge, it stopped maintaining its physical and structural strength, it stopped serving the people.
With the statin.
Right. The will is just the law of consequences kicking in. If you stop maintaining, the bridge collapses. That collapse is divine will because it is the law of physics in action.
This just completely recontextualizes history. It's not a series of accidents, it's a series of audits.
That is a brilliant way to put it. History is a constant audit of merit. If you possess the qualities, you rise. If you lose them, you fall. No favoritism.
So we have established that leadership is earned through merit, ilm, and jism, and that the universe operates on a strict system of law, mashiach, not luck. Now, I want to pivot to the third big theme, because this is where the rubber really meets the road.
The conflict.
Yes, we are talking about conflict, war, because the sources spend a massive amount of time defining what it means to be fighting in the way of Allah, or fi sabilillah.
This is a crucial definition, especially given how wildly misunderstood and misused this term is in the modern world.
Right. People hear fi sabilillah and they immediately think holy war in a very generic, aggressive sense, a crusade, jihad, fighting to spread your religion by the sword.
But the sources are incredibly specific about what this actually means.
Very specific. The sources argue that fi sabilillah has a sole exclusive mandate. It is not about conquering territory.
No.
It is not about looting resources. It is not even about spreading religion. The text defines it exclusively as taking up arms specifically to break the power of an oppressor and to protect the vulnerable.
So it is fundamentally a defensive or protective act.
Yes.
It is an act of liberation, not conquest.
Exactly. And the sources contrast it heavily with its opposite, which is taghut.
Taghut. Let's define that for the listeners.
So taghut generally means tyranny, or that which crosses the limits. Fighting in the way of taghut is defined as using power to crush the weak, to satisfy your own ego, or to expand your empire.
So the moral binary here isn't believer versus non-believer.
No.
It is oppressor versus defender of the oppressed.
That is such a key distinction. So if
Yeah.
you are fighting to grab land, you are fighting for takhut, even if you call yourself a believer and quote scripture while you do it. But if you are fighting to stop a genocide, you are fighting fi sabila, regardless of the banners you fly.
Precisely. And the sources say this applies universally. Whether you are defending yourself from being wiped out or stepping in to save another group that is being crushed, that is the divine mandate.
But this leads us to the most fascinating linguistic deep dive in the entire stack.
I know exactly where you're going.
The definition of the word
Zulm, which is almost always translated simply as oppression or cruelty.
yes. But the sources ask us to look at the ontological root of the word. Linguistically, zulm means when a thing is not exactly at the place it should be. Displacement, putting something in the wrong place, that is the essence of oppression according to the root word. Now, keeping that definition in mind, that zulm is being out of place, let's look at the battlefield.
Let's play this out.
What is the rightful place of a soldier during a battle?
Standing in the line, facing the enemy, protecting the people behind him.
Correct. His designated rightful place is firm on the battlefield. Now, what happens if he gets scared and turns and runs away?
He is no longer in his rightful place.
He has displaced himself. And because zulm is defined linguistically as displacement, the sources argue that the fleeing soldier has actually become a zalim, an oppressor.
That is, wow. Let's sit with that for a second because that is huge. Usually we think of the guy running away as a coward or maybe just a victim of extreme trauma. We might even feel sorry for him.
Right.
But the sources are calling him an oppressor. How is running away an act of oppression?
You have to connect the dots. Why was he there in the first place? To protect the vulnerable, to stop the takhut. By leaving his post, by removing himself from the place he should be, he creates a gap.
He creates a void in the defense.
Exactly. And the enemy flows right into that void. He allows the enemy to break through the line. His absence directly results in the crushing of the innocent behind him. Therefore, his act of fleeing actively participates in the oppression.
He isn't just a passive observer to the tragedy.
No, his displacement is the actual cause of the harm.
That is a staggering moral burden. It means that inaction or fleeing from duty is just as criminal as the act of oppression itself.
It completely dissolves the difference between passive and active when it comes to duty. If your duty is to stand and you run, you are an agent of chaos. You are a zalim.
Now, the sources note that there are exceptions, of course.
Right. Tactical maneuvers.
Exactly. Repositioning, falling back to a better vantage point, that's fine, because that is still part of the fight. But fleeing, abandoning the post out of fear, that is zulm.
And the really brilliant thing is the sources don't just leave this concept on the battlefield, do they? They expand this definition to civilian life.
They do. And this is where it applies to literally every listener. If zulm is being out of place, then think about it. A judge who accepts a bribe or refuses to hear a valid case is committing zulm.
Because the rightful place of a judge is the seat of impartial justice.
Correct. By failing to uphold that impartiality, they have displaced themselves. An administrator who neglects their duty is out of place. A teacher who doesn't actually prepare their lesson plan and just wastes the student's time is out of place.
It entirely redefines corruption, doesn't it?
It does.
Corruption isn't just stealing money from a vault. Corruption is simply not being where you are supposed to be, doing what you are inherently supposed to do.
Precisely. You are displacing the vital function of your role. You are creating a void where there should be active service. And in that void, harm happens, people suffer. And that harm is your fault.
That is the physics of oppression. It is social entropy.
It brings us right back to that core idea of law versus chaos. The divine will is a system of ultimate order. Zulm oppression is a system of disorder, of things being out of their rightful place.
So the holy war, or the struggle, fi sabilillah, is really just the effort to put things back in their right place, to restore balance.
Beautifully put. It is the restoration of order against the forces of entropy.
I want to go back to the story of the Israelites for a moment, because there is a really tragic irony here that the sources highlight. We talked about Talut, the meritocratic leader. But let's talk about the people he was actually leading.
The Bani Israel. Yes, this is what the sources use as a case study in empty rhetoric.
Because they started off so enthusiastic, they demanded a king, they were yelling, "Why should we not fight in the way of Allah when we have been expelled from our homes?" They had all the right talking points down perfectly.
They had the grievance. They had the fiery rhetoric. We are victims. We will fight. But the sources point out the massive gap between their words and their actions.
Right.
When the fighting was actually prescribed, meaning when it was written down as a divine mandate, When the reality of war hit them, the text says most of them turned away. They flaked completely. And remember, the sources point out that the people who demanded the commander in the first place were the elite.
The aristocracy we talked about earlier.
Yes, the exact same ones who looked down on Talut for being poor.
So the people who talked the absolute loudest about fighting for justice were the first ones to run away when the swords were drawn.
It's a classic pattern of human behavior. The sources use this to fiercely illustrate that verbal profession of faith. Just saying, I believe or I stand for justice means absolutely nothing without the struggle.
Without the conflict.
Right. It's incredibly easy to tweet about justice. It's incredibly hard to stand in the actual line of fire.
Exactly. And the text mentions this event called the river test to prove this point.
The river test is fascinating. Talut is leading his army, and he takes them to a river, and he tells them, do not drink from this, except a mere sip from the hollow of your hand.
They're marching, they're exhausted, they're thirsty, and he says, don't drink.
Exactly. It's a test of ultimate discipline, a test of delayed gratification and obedience to the commander. And of course, most of them fail. They gorge themselves on the water.
It's a filter.
It's a strict filtering process. You have to filter out the rhetorical warriors from the actual warriors, because if you can't control your thirst, how are you going to control your fear when an army is charging at you?
And the sources have this really poetic, almost haunting observation about why those men ultimately ran from the battlefield later. They describe them as fleeing as if afraid of death. But the commentary notes a really profound metaphor here regarding shadows.
Oh, I love this part. Explain the shadow metaphor for us.
So think about how a shadow works in the sunlight. If you turn your back to the sun and run away from it, your shadow stretches out in front of you.
Right.
You are chasing it, or it is chasing you, depending on how you look at it, but you can never escape it. It just looms larger and larger the faster you run.
It's always there, stretching out ominously.
But if you stop, turn around, and actually face the sun, if you face the source of light, if you face reality, the shadow falls behind you. The metaphor implies that by running from the inevitable reality of death or running from your duty, you are actually letting the fear haunt you. You are letting it control your every move. But if you face it, if you stand in your rightful place, as we discussed with Zolm, you conquer the fear, the shadow disappears behind you.
That is incredible. And that brings us right back to that soldier. The one who stands firm isn't just protecting the vulnerable people behind him. He is conquering his own shadow. He is perfectly aligning himself with reality.
Yes. And this brings us to the final and perhaps the most deeply philosophical section of our entire deep dive today, the constitution of the universe.
This is the part that touches on the very nature of God himself. And the sources make a claim here that is quite surprising, maybe even controversial, if you're used to thinking of God strictly as just all-powerful and unbound.
It is the concept of Sunnah Allah, the way of God. The sources point out a profound theological paradox here. God is all-powerful. He can do anything. Theoretically, he could make gravity push us upwards tomorrow. He could make fire freeze things instead of burn them.
Sure, that's omnipotence. That's the textbook definition of a deity.
But the text argues that God has prescribed mercy upon himself. He has voluntarily bound himself to his own laws.
A self-imposed restriction. That is a truly fascinating concept for an all-powerful deity.
It is. The sources argue that God never breaks his own rules. The sun doesn't randomly rise in the west just for fun to mix things up. The universe follows a strict, unyielding constitution.
And the argument the sources make is that this total reliability is the actual definition of mercy.
Exactly. Think about it. Imagine if the laws of physics literally changed every day based on whim. Imagine if divine will was truly random. You plant corn in your field, but because God was in a different mood, you might grow cactus, or it might burst into fire, or nothing might happen at all.
That wouldn't be mercy. That would be a literal nightmare. It would be pure chaos.
You couldn't build a civilization. You couldn't plan for tomorrow. You couldn't have science.
Exactly. Science is only possible because we deeply trust that the laws of the universe are consistent. And the same goes for morality. Morality is only possible if we trust that good input leads to good output and bad input leads to bad output.
Right.
If God arbitrarily punished good people and rewarded tyrants randomly, the entire concept of morality would collapse into nihilism. So the law is mercy precisely because it creates predictability. It allows for meritocracy to exist. It allows us to build and strive with confidence.
And the sources connect this grand cosmic idea right back down to human leadership. This is the ultimate so what for the politicians and the kings.
Right. The logic is so undeniable. If the ultimate power god himself follows a said constitution and never deviates from his own established law, then how unbelievably arrogant is it for a mere human leader to think they are above the law?
If God isn't a dictator, a human certainly shouldn't be.
Precisely. The sources argue that true submission, what is termed Islam or surrender in the text, isn't about bowing down to a tyrant. It is about actively aligning oneself with these immutable universal laws.
It is submitting to the law of merit, the law of justice, the law of consequence.
A leader who violates the constitution of their people is not just being a bad politician. They are acting against the very nature of the divine order.
That is a powerful framework. It really strips away all the mystique of authoritarianism. The dictator isn't some shadow of God on earth. The dictator is an anomaly, a glitch in the system.
A displacement. A zulm.
Wow. Let's try to synthesize all of this, because we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the desperate Israelites wanting a king and getting a harsh lesson in meritocracy instead.
Right. We moved away from the great man theory of aristocracy, that toxic reliance on wealth and lineage, and replaced it entirely with ilm, cognitive processing and knowledge, and jism, physical capability and endurance.
And importantly, vastatin, the abundance of those traits used specifically for service to others, not oneself.
Then we tackled the really big one, Masha. We redefined divine will not as a random lottery, but as a strict law, the Kanuni Mashiat.
If you want the result, you have to meet the standard. You have to earn it. The dean isn't picking favorites. You just have to study for the test.
Which kills fatalism dead. It forces us to take total responsibility for our condition.
Then we looked at the battlefield. We defined the holy struggle, fi sabilillah, not as religious conquest, but strictly as breaking oppression and defending the vulnerable. And we defined oppression, zulm, ontologically as being out of place.
Which violently indicts the fleeing soldier, the corrupt judge, and the lazy administrator alike. If you aren't doing your specific duty, you are an oppressor. You are creating a void where harm enters the world.
And finally, we looked at the cosmic constitution. God follows the law. He binds himself to it out of mercy, so we must follow the law. It is a completely coherent, deeply interconnected system.
It really is. It's a worldview that absolutely demands action. It demands that you get educated, that you build your ilm. It demands that you get strong, you build your jism. And it demands that you stand your ground in your rightful place.
It leaves absolutely zero room for waiting around for a savior to fix things for you.
And that actually brings us to the final thought I want the listener to sit with. The sources suggest that looking for a savior, much like the Israelites looking for a shiny, rich king, is very often just a psychological way to avoid doing the hard work yourself.
The savior isn't a person riding in on a white horse.
No, the savior is the law itself. The system is already there, perfectly established, just waiting for you to utilize it.
And that leads to a really provocative question to end on today. If oppression is defined as displacement, as simply being out of place, where are you right now listening to this out of place in your own life?
As the ultimate mirror. Are you holding a position you aren't truly qualified for? That's zone.
Are you completely ignoring a responsibility at home or at work that you are explicitly supposed to handle? That's zone.
Are you running away from a difficult conflict that you're morally supposed to resolve? That's zone.
It asks us to look at our own lives with brutal honesty and ask, am I standing firm in my designated place? Or have I fled and let the shadow take over?
A heavy question, but an absolutely necessary one if you want to understand power. Stop waiting for Masha to happen to you and start realizing that Masha is exactly what happens through your adherence to the law.
What you earn happens, period.
Exactly.
Thank you all for diving so deeply with us today. This was a really dense one, I know, but I think it fundamentally changes the way we have to look at power, at leadership, and at our own daily responsibilities.
It certainly changed my perspective during the research.
Until next time, keep looking for the law beneath the chaos. Take care.
Bye-bye.